Okay, so I just want to thank you all for coming. The turnout today is overwhelming. We've never had a seated crowd in our gym before. We've done some open events, but very much more informal. People are milling about, eating and having a beverage and looking at the facilities with Jackie. And so this is fun for us to be able to see how many people can we put into our facility. We did not call the fire marshal to ask him about that, but you, just for an informed audience, there's 2 doors there on your left, and there's 2 doors out in the front, and there's an exit in the studio as well. So if you begin to panic, you've got lots of exit opportunities.
And
there's
no
some more
oxygen will
seats.
drop from the overhead compartment.
There's some more seats over that direction. Come on in and get settled. So I'm Diane Shiffer, and this is our practice here at Connect and Beyond Physical Therapy. So I have an amazing team, and I'll introduce you to my PTs, and I have one of my instructors here as well. And we are thrilled to be able to kind of, I guess, blend our families today. Miles and I enjoy punting or playing a little bit of soccer with ideas. We treat very similarly. Miles from a more global primary care perspective and ourselves from the movement perspective, but very much have the same philosophies about how it's important to take care of ourselves. So consider yourself now a blended family, whether you come as a Connect and Beyond family member or whether you come as a comprehensive risk management, GreatMed family member. Now we'll just, I don't know what we'll call ourselves, GreatMed, Connect and Beyond, or something like that. So thank you. So I would love to just take a minute to introduce you to my team. They have slightly different name tags on than you guys do. I'm going to start in the back with Liz Finley, who's one of our PTs, just a fantastic manual therapist who has extensive work and expertise in visceral mobilization as well as all forms of manual therapy. Just outstanding. She's been with us just about 7 or 8 months, yeah. And I'd want her to stay forever. So Sue Ellen, and her husband is with us tonight too, Ron. So that's her this afternoon. And this is Sue Ellen Stewart. She's a longtime physical therapist, dear friend of mine. We've worked together for about 13 years now, and Sue Ellen has deep expertise in all things orthopedic. She also is a content area expert in osteoporosis, and if you look at some of our flyers and other areas, she and Diane together, Diane's standing right there, teach an osteoporosis combined education and movement course here on the Beyond side of things. Marie Hibbs is a very dear friend, but she's not a PT. This is Shannon Koffel-Weil. Shannon is our Pilates instructor, and we've had a long-term relationship with Shannon going back many, many, many years, but we've never had room for her equipment here. So we kind of have squished things a little bit together so we'd have more footfall space today. But we now have room for her reformer and her Cadillac. So Shannon, she sees her Pilates one-on-one patients here in our office. So really fun for us. There's a lot of crossover between her clients and ours. So it's a fun progression that we're doing, and also has taught some mat classes for us as well. And that's Deanne Doherty peeking around. She is my work wife. We have worked together about 38 years, maybe a little bit longer than that. And our team teases us that we can complete each other's sentences, or we don't even say sentences. It's more like do you and yeah and where, I don't know. So Deanne is also an excellent orthopedic and manual physical therapist. She teaches alignment-based yoga for us, and really was probably the impetus for what got us started on this little bit of a dream about Beyond Physical Therapy. We taught alignment yoga in our other clinic, and those of you who have seen that know that it was kind of squishy and tight, and we had to break the gym down each evening for teaching. So we... Well, that's true. It's the collaborative we. So we started about, 5 or 6 years ago, sort of dreaming a little bit of a dream about could we ever envision a facility where we would be able to do physical therapy, primarily orthopedics, and I have one more PT to introduce you to that has another specialty area as well. but primarily orthopedics. And but could we have a facility that would allow that to happen during the day, and then at the same time be able to teach all of the lifestyle and lifespan enhancing exercise that we think is so vital? And so we dreamed it, and it appeared. So here we are. We were able to buy this building about 2 years ago and remodel it so that we got to do exactly what we want. And I'm hoping afterwards you feel free to wander around. That side of the building is mostly clinical. We have 5 treatment rooms for each of the individual PTs to see their patients throughout the day. Everybody sooner or later ends up out here where they're working on their own exercise programs or collaboratively with several others. And then at the same time, we have classes going on in all of the content areas: yoga, a couple kinds of yoga, Tai Chi, melt, eccentrics, Qigong. So that is sort of a fun and exciting opportunity. So that's us. Andrea, if you'll poke your head out, this is Andrea Larison. She's another PT, also a wonderful orthopedic therapist, and she does our vestibular and balance work and post-concussive work. And then way tucked in behind there is Natalie Graham, who is one of our pelvic therapists. So we have a very robust program for pelvic wellness for both male and female clients. So as we break at the end of the day, I hope you'll take an opportunity to single somebody out that you might have a question about a specific content area. So welcome aboard. Okay, I appreciate this man very much. I've known him a really, really long time. Miles was preaching about lifestyle medicine before it was cool. And it's now very cool and very topical, and everywhere you look, people are talking about it. So this is the expert in the field, in my opinion, and we love treating patients together and seeing people together. So we're going to do a little bit of a maybe table tennis, ping pong match here today. Open to questions as we go. So in content areas, we're going to talk about food, big surprise. We're going to talk about exercise. And then we're going to talk about some of the other things that make for a healthy lifestyle and a healthy, full life where we're looking at not just increasing our lifespan, but working extensively on our health span. And that is a multi-dimensional, integrated approach. So that's what we're up to today. So we don't have room for a ping pong table, but I know Miles would like us to be playing ping pong today, but we're just going to ping pong back and forth with each other. Right?
Well, thank you. So part of this is we're also trying to promote we have the new educational foundation called GreatMed.org that hopefully many of you have heard about, which is intended to provide the kind of lifestyle information at no cost directly to the consumer, because people aren't being told that they can use diet and exercise to reverse diabetes, treat their high blood pressure. So too often people are going to the doctor, getting a bunch of pills, and they don't realize that there's other things they could be doing that would reduce or eliminate the needs for pills, that would reduce costs, that would reduce complications. And so GreatMed.org is intended to be a vehicle that will dramatically reduce, if we can be successful in our communication, dramatically reduce the burden of preventable disease everywhere in the world at no cost to the consumer. That's our sort of educational goal. And so we have these design bodies that are designed to handle certain types of fuel. And if we give them the right fuel, it looks like we do a whole lot better, and we get this health span, this improved. And when we talk about health span and longevity, we're not just talking about living longer. We're talking about living better forever, how long we can live. So we don't know how long we can live, right? There's a lot of debate. But the idea being to stay healthy, boom, gone. And so having that picture in your mind, as against slowly dribbling off the court, losing your independence, life becoming around. I mean, you know people who life is a round of seeing physicians, and it stops being much fun. I mean, it does keep Diane and I in business, so there is a place for it, because otherwise we'd have to go earn an honest living somewhere. But so I'm going to just talk briefly about the whole idea of how you choose your diet, because diet is really important, exercise is really important, fitness, waistline is really important, and then you get like physicians and stuff, right, which have a modest role to play. Because if you're taking care of yourself, you should probably hardly ever need to see a physician. Incidentally, Lou, Erica, if I'm overplaying this, then yell at me. I just identified a couple of physicians that if they say, Miles, quit damning the whole profession, then they can speak up, of course. But so first of all, let's think about who you should believe, right? Because you've got on one side, you've got people who are saying, hey, you should eat a vegetarian diet, a vegan diet, whatever. On the other side, you've got some keto people that say you should eat all fat and bacon. And you get people like me who say you should eat all the traditional food people have always ever eaten. And so how do you know who's right? And so the first thing to do is train yourself to be a critical thinker about healthcare. And where it comes to food, or any aspect of healthcare, our personal rule of thumb, and you could adapt this in various ways, our personal rule of thumb is to have at least 3 lines of independent evidence to support any recommendation. And if we don't have 3 lines, it's a fad. Now, it may end up having currency later on. I'm not saying that anything that's new is bad. But you've usually got your hands full with the stuff that we can actually confirm. And so 3 lines of evidence, for example, might be historical precedent. If people have been eating eggs for the entire recorded history of humankind, eggs are probably okay. And then you combine it with observational studies and you say, hey, if you look at a population that eats eggs, do they do better or do they worse? Do they do worse? And if they do okay, then you say, that's a second line of evidence. Then you might have randomized controlled trials where you have people eat eggs or not eat eggs for a given length of time and you see, how do they do? And so that'd be an example of 3 lines of evidence because people have been using narcotics for a long time, but that doesn't mean that they're good for you. Because those have been around for a long time also. I still think God put the opium poppy on the planet for a reason, but it can be misused. So first of all, think about having a critical way of deciding who's right, who's right, who should you listen to, and remember, we're only wrong on days ending in Y. So we would argue that the strongest evidence by far is for simple omnivorous diets, including the foods that people have eaten forever. And so if you look at randomized controlled trials, those mostly demonstrate the Mediterranean model within the omnivorous sphere, the omnivorous world, has the strongest evidence. But we're betting that it's a whole food model that matters. But it's certainly the Mediterranean model, which is lots of fruits and vegetables, beans, grains, cultured dairy, animal proteins like not just dairy but eggs and meat and fish and chicken and so on. That's the model that works the best, but especially including a lot of fruits and vegetables. And finally, one thing that's often overlooked in the Mediterranean diet studies is that they emphasize cooking food at home. And Karen's going to be giving us a demonstration in a little bit, but I think it's really ignored the fact that cooking food at home is really important. So I'm going to step back a second and look at one large study, the Nurses' Health Study, that looked at a set of 5 habits. And it said if you follow these habits, you're going to live a lot longer, like 12 years. It was in over their 30-year span of the study with about 130,000 people. Nurses' Health Study is a study out of Harvard, paid for by you. Thank you. And so these 5 habits were 30 minutes or more of moderate to vigorous activity every day, not 3 days a week. Where did people come up with these stupid ideas? 30 minutes on an omnivorous diet, fruits, vegetables, beans, grains, a small amount of alcohol every day, not smoking, and not being chubby. If you took those 5 factors together, so in other words, you had to have a waist that goes in, not out. That's not a bad way of identifying whether you're chubby or not. So if you took those 5 factors together, you had about 90% less risk of having diabetes, about 80% less risk of having a heart attack or stroke, about 60% less risk of having any cancer. Plus, you live longer. You live longer, you live better, you don't need doctors. What's not to like about that? So that gives, and I could reproduce that data in Interheart, in Pure, in EPIC. These are all names of gigantic studies that all give roughly the same answer. And so that's the sort of the idea I'd like people to realize is if you can identify where your diet can improve, you're going to be able to identify where you can stay away from people like me, where you can stay away from pharmaceuticals, and where you can have a better life for a longer time. Any thoughts about that? This is a very well-behaved audience.
Two.
Yeah.
Well, Miles, just maybe say a little bit about there's multiple other opportunities out there for eating either vegan or vegetarian, or so can you just speak to that a little bit? I know you're a meat guy, and we also hear so much in the contemporary literature about protein. So how does that factor in for you in your diet?
So when you look at the vegan or vegetarian literature, it just does not hold up. So the first thing to look for is randomized controlled trials. And admittedly, in defense of the vegan and vegetarian investigators, it's really hard to get people to agree to a randomized controlled trial of a vegetarian diet if they're not already on a vegetarian diet. So we're stuck with observational studies. And observational studies just don't give anywhere near the degree of benefit that we see with the Mediterranean diet model, not even close. And plus, vegetarians, and if you read vegetarian literature, they'll usually tell you to take a supplement. Maybe zinc, maybe iron, maybe B12. So I would argue, what healthy diet requires that you use synthetic chemicals to supplement it? So I don't know, did I answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. I think, looking at what are the alternatives for protein in particular
if people are going to be vegetarian?
Yeah, if that's for whatever. Philosophically, maybe it's an animal rights thing and you're a vegetarian because of that.
So grains run 18%, 20% protein, beans, something similarly. I mean, you can certainly get enough protein if you work at it.
Eggs.
Well, a lot of the group we're talking about often won't eat eggs either. But
I'm thinking of lacto-ovo vegetarians that do eggs.
And dairy. Oh, if you're willing to eat dairy, eggs and dairy, you're fine.
You're good, yeah.
Now, Dr. Hassell, if you're following what you suggest, Mediterranean diet, then I would assume one doesn't need to take multivitamin plus 50.
Correct. I would argue that the place for multivitamins is probably absent. Yeah. So
if you get everything you need from food,
it looks
you're
like,
good to
for the
go.
most part, unless you're a unique individual, because there are unique individuals that need B12 supplementation or iron for any number of reasons. There's various malabsorption syndromes. So I'm not saying, what we're talking about, of course, is in generalities. For any given individual, there might be an exception.
Lately, it seems to be the thought that we need 30 grams of protein with every meal. It's hard to do that.
Yeah, 30 grams, I think that would be, so there's a lot of uncertainty over how much protein you need. And so I wouldn't get, we recommend having a substantial protein serving with every meal. But exactly, we see an awful lot of very, very healthy elderly people who haven't turned into protein neurotics. So I don't think we actually know for sure. I think it's saying at least a gram per kilo per day is at least a reasonable minimum, and exactly where it should be. Because you get some people who say, for a couple of weeks I tried, and this is something we often try for people with depression or fatigue, we say, bump up your protein for 2 weeks, especially red meat protein or salmon or oily fish, and tell me if you feel any better. And it's amazing how often they just say, wow, I feel a lot better. So, but to put a certain number on it is really tough. And often creates this burden. What we see is people kind of making up numbers for which we don't have a strong basis. And it creates this burden for people. If they're not doing this, there's something wrong with them. And so we like to keep our recommendations to things that we can actually say this is worth doing, such as 30 minutes of moderate to vigorous activity a day. And so that's, I hope that answers your question. It's not that the 30 grams per meal people are wrong necessarily. We may find out that they're right. But it's a little unclear, I would argue, at this point. Can I mention one more thing about food before we talk about fitness? And that is,
You got time. You just run.
this idea of highly processed foods and how harmful they are. Once again, this is something that we really have good data for. So numerous studies, probably the first big one was probably the Nutrinet Santé study from France, but there's been numerous studies since then, and they all say roughly the same thing, that for every 10% increase in these what we call ultra-processed foods, which is most bakery products, most frozen products, most restaurant products, pretty much almost all foods made outside the home, for every 10% increase in your diet that you have measured by calories that you have in your diet, there's a significant increase in cancer, depression, aging based on damage to the DNA, which is a slightly different thing. Did I mention cancer? I mentioned heart disease. I mentioned heart failure. I mentioned diabetes. I mentioned depression. Sorry, I apologize for repeating myself, but I sort of lost track of where I was. So let's say that person who thinks they're supposed to be getting 30 grams per meal is getting it in the form of a protein hydrolysate that they got from New Seasons, a nice can of this powder. Well, that's a classic example of one of the foods that's included in those foods that kill you. I'm exaggerating a tiny bit. And so often people think that these like pea proteins or something, they're kind of, some Norwegian trolls ground up peas in the midnight sun and they're kind of whole foods. They're not. They're chemical constructs. And so watch out for chemical constructs that are pretending to be real food because we have real evidence that that family of foods looks like it's bad for you. The trouble is, how do you figure this out? And so we have what's called the Pioneer Woman test. So if a Pioneer Woman would recognize the food, it's probably okay. So a Pioneer Woman's going to recognize fruits, vegetables, beans, and grains. She's going to recognize canned beans. She's going to, these simple traditional preserved foods. She's going to recognize cheese and butter. She's going to recognize yogurt and kefir because they happen by accident, whether you want them to or not, when you don't have a refrigerator. She's going to recognize ham and bacon, produced using salts or sugars, not produced chemicals. And so there's actually in the preserved meat area is an interesting example of where you have to be thoughtful because the modern preserved meats and the traditional preserved meats, and I'll give a shout out to Olympic Provisions, or Olympia Provisions, Olympic, because they use the traditional methods of preserving their meat. And so there probably is a real difference there. So think to yourself that maybe the first step a lot of people need to make is cooking more of their own food at home.
So when you said earlier, eating the way people have always eaten, obviously you're not including processed foods.
Right, because up until...
You're talking about whole foods only.
Whole foods, well, so there was a break point around about 1880, 1900, where we discovered how to hydrogenate oils and make margarine, bad news. How we learned to process oils that were normally inedible. For example, your ancestors didn't have avocado oil because any simple method of producing avocado oil was such a horrible tasting product, they didn't happen. They used lard instead. So around about 1888 to 1900, white flour, white sugar, all these different modern foods, white rice, all came into play. Sort of over a similar span of time. It was kind of interesting in terms of food technology. And so that's why we use the Pioneer Woman test, because she would recognize foods made before that time. Did I answer your question, or did I completely go off on a...
It sounds to me like when you start eliminating those things, you're not talking about the way people have eaten in the past.
From the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, that's correct, and 2000s. Yeah.
Oh, I see what you mean, yeah. So
And you're describing, in my mind, almost when you start eliminating those things, you're describing the Mediterranean diet.
Right.
I like the way you think.
Well, that's the way I've been eating.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure that I'm doing something correct here.
Sure sounds like to me, because it agrees with me and it agrees with Diane, so you're in.
You're in for two.
Yeah. Rich? Oh, sorry. Sorry, Nancy gets precedence. Sorry.
Question, in terms of the protein, a bit like the drinks, like Ensure, Boost. What are your thoughts?
Can't hear the question.
So the question is, what do I think of Ensure and Boost? It's a good thing I was raised to only use clean language. To me, they're just a classic example of a chemical construct. And the fact that they're the most commonly prescribed by physicians, I think just tells you how the depths to which the medical profession have sunk. How's that?
Thank you.
You like that? They're in the book, in Good Food, Great Medicine. My sister and I wrote this, yeah. It's in the 4th edition. We have a smoothie recipe, which actually is good for you. But, you know, with chicken soup, we actually did a study. We were funded by Safeway to do a study on finding a substitute for Ensure and Boost that would actually be healthy. We actually got a pretty good chicken soup that had fabulous nutritional profile, and we couldn't find anybody who would make it. It was really interesting. So it's not that hard to replace Ensure and Boost. You just have to be willing to use a kitchen or know somebody who would. Rich.
Yeah, you talked about eating guidelines in general. How does one translate them into your individual needs, and how might that shift from one person to another?
Give me an example. I'm not tracking.
So I embrace the Mediterranean diet, but is it from an individual point of view, is it proportions of nutrients that might vary in my diet? Because I crave more protein, or I need more carbs, or how do I figure out what?
Very few people in our society need more carbs, let me tell you. So yeah, I don't think we actually have those answers. So we recommend people have a grain or bean every day, fruit or vegetable with every meal and snack, protein with every meal and snack, some sort of cultured food most days.
And you just stumped Miles because he said, I don't have the answer.
Oh yeah, so you get a prize. We forgot. That's a half a gallon of Durant olive oil. Durant are the only local producer of olive oil. They make their olive oil out of olives grown in Oregon and California, and it's fabulous oil. And olive oil is unique, and it's the only oil we can point to that is associated with less death over the course of study. In other words, greater longevity, less cancer, less heart disease, less depression. And this is very consistent data over dozens of studies. I'm not cherry picking here. Olive oil really looks like it's a special product. And so we think it's one of those things that's worth spending some extra money on. And thus we promote Durant olive oil. Although they are not sponsoring today, we'll talk about them anyway. Yeah.
Question on olive oil. We've been told by a cardiologist that cooking with olive oil is not a good thing to do.
So this is a great example of where you're a critical thinker. So the first thing you do is ask the doctor, why do you say that? Yeah. Give me a reference. So you'll notice in Good Food, Great Medicine that we footnote everything that we think is important. Not only that, but in areas that are controversial, that we perceive are going to be controversial, we probably haven't hit them all, where we talk about, for example, red meat. We talk about why we think it's good. We talk about why other people think it's bad, and we use the best sources we can find, the most authoritative sources that oppose us. It's ridiculous, but anyway, some people do. And then we try to resolve those two issues in a way that we hope makes sense to people. So that cardiologist needs to tell you why cooking with olive oil is bad. And then you can also use the Greek grandmother test. So you say to the Greek grandmother, hey, can I cook with olive oil? And she says, yes, so you can. Or maybe she's Italian. But you get the idea. So I think people throw these things out, and they've got to have a reason, a rationale.
Well, the reason he did it to my wife, the reason he gave was that when it's raised to a certain temperature, it starts breaking down. The breakdown of it is not healthy.
If you can find the evidence for that, let me know.
I'm just telling you what he told me.
Yeah, no, but he should have his feet put to the fire, as I should. So you can say, hey, Miles, have you done any studies on this? Or, no, I haven't done any personally, but other people have, and they've shown no problems at all. In fact, improvement in outcomes.
I read where peanut oil is for high heat, so is that not good?
What was that?
Peanut oil instead of olive oil.
Yeah, we use olive oil for everything, sorry, or butter,
So you
or lard.
You can use olive oil for high heat.
Yeah, well, if it's smoking, you didn't put your vegetables in soon enough.
That's the recommendation for
Yeah.
peanut oil, is that you can get that heat up so much higher. It's a higher.
So if you're trying to do weirdo cooking, maybe you use weirdo oils, but peanut oil is not a healthy oil. in the form that you get it. And that's because all these vegetable oils, in order to make them edible, like if you just squeeze oil out of peanuts, it tastes horrible. And it used to actually be on the market for some hardcore health nuts. It might actually be healthy in that form. There are a few other traditional oils, walnut oil, sesame oil, and so on. They tend to be really expensive and they haven't been studied, but we're probably pretty sure they're probably okay, just as coconut oil is probably okay. But olive oil is the one to hang your hat on if you want to live longer.
But you said lard?
My favorite. I did say lard. I'm afraid I did. Would a pioneer woman recognize lard? Yes, she would. Can you find any evidence that people who eat lard live differently? No. In fact, more if you eat more saturated fat, your risk of stroke in multiple studies is less for some reason. Yeah. So we might, Lori.
Can you tell me about the increased popularity of avocado oil?
Yeah, well, because the chemists figured out a way to make avocado oil edible, and it's a waste product of avocado processing. So of course it becomes popular because marketing. So now we are going to transition. We're going to transition to a cooking class.
Can we do one more quick question? We got one more.
Okay.
I'm here for fish, but I know it's good. And in your book, you don't talk a lot about shellfish. And I'm wondering if I can do crab and that kind of thing instead.
Yeah. So my sister and I have our own biases, right? And we don't really like shellfish. So it doesn't show up much. But shellfish are actually interesting in terms of people who are looking at, like, for example, if you say, look at the nutrient complex in red meat. It's kind of largely duplicated in shellfish. And so it looks like our diets and our bodies have been designed to handle whatever you got available. Karen, are you going to teach us something? And Mr. Blackwell, you had a question.
Doctor, in those rare instances where someone is burning an excessive amount of calories, say 4,000 calories a day for a few days, how does one restore one's glycogen reserves without Ensure and a few things you can pound out?
Smoothies. So the question is, let's pretend you're really at a high level of exercise. You're a Navy SEAL in training. You're a bricklayer working 14-hour days to get a job done. You're burning 4,000 or 5,000, 6,000 calories a day. The idea is liquid calories work really well because your body can take in liquid calories faster than it can take in solid calories. So people tend to use smoothies under those conditions. And if you make your own smoothies, there's a recipe in the book, you can make it in huge quantities and freeze it.
Thank you.
You bet. Or if you're, we have a nephew who's Navy SEAL, and he said when they're out in the water, there'd be officers running around in boats and handing them Snickers bars and things. We don't really recommend that, but.
It's a quick hit.
Yeah. So Karen. Karen Zink is the proprietor of My Family Chef. And so if you don't feel like cooking, guess who will cook for you. So what are you going to tell us about, Karen?
I'm going to tell you about a quick and easy vinaigrette that you can make at home. One thing that Dr. Hassell told me was when it comes to your health, look for the low-hanging fruit, meaning something that's quick and easy that you can choose to make a big impact. And I think homemade dressings is a great example of low-hanging fruit. And
when you make your own dressings, it's going to have good ingredients. Are the people that are making your dressings in the supermarket going to be buying the best ingredients?
No.
No matter what it says on the label. It's probably cheap. Over to Karen.
Absolutely. So this recipe, the base recipe, you will find in my favorite nutrition book. And really, the thing I love about this is that you only need a few ingredients, and you probably have them in your cupboard. So we're going to start with apple cider vinegar. You want the raw, unfiltered. You need to shake it because you'll see some cloudiness that you want to get in there.
Mud. We call it mud.
Mud. the mother. Save your jars. These are key for food prep. And I used to measure the first few times that I made this recipe, but I just don't anymore. Suddenly I'm nervous making this dressing, and I've made it 1,000 times in my house. This is the Durant olive oil. The only thing that I don't love is the way that it pours out of the big jug. So I get a funnel and just kind of pour it in here and reload every time.
What's the proportion that you use?
I think it's about 1 part vinegar to 3 parts oil-ish, depending on what you like. And you can
It's
use...
very important that you're absolutely precise.
Right.
Totally.
But the olive oil also comes in a smaller bottle.
They do. We use so much olive oil that it just makes sense to get the big one, some kosher salt. And I actually was convinced to not use the avocado oil. I have a wok at home, and my kids will eat as many kind of flash fried green beans as I'll make. And I was really nervous, because of the smoke point. But now I have switched to olive oil after our discussion. So a little salt. Again, everything is to taste. I think there's really nothing you can substitute for salt and pepper. But yeah, other fresh herbs, parsley especially, dried herbs, whatever you love. A little mustard, any kind is fine. If you love mustard, put more. If you don't, you can put less.
That's not prepared mustard, that's regular stone ground or?
It's kind of stone ground. This is just the one I love in the store. There's French and English, and it's not the yellow mustard. I hope this is a good one. Do you approve?
I think, yeah.
Okay.
That's the one I would use.
Okay, good. Fresh garlic. Now, if you don't have fresh garlic at home, garlic powder will work, but you will miss out on a lot of nutritional value if you don't use fresh. And then last, raw and unfiltered honey is definitely worth the little bit extra, the investment. Try to get it local. There's so many things, so many advantages to having that. And you can substitute honey and even maple syrup in so many recipes, but I love it in salad dressing because you don't cook it. And so you get every bit of nutrition from your honey. I just love, this isn't in the recipe, but I just love a little fresh lemon or lime. And you can also use that in place of the vinegar.
Normally, you're not permitted to alter any of our recipes.
So you can, just really quick and easy, shake up your dressing. I do love my immersion blender, one of my favorite things in the kitchen, and it does just kind of, I think it's plugged in. It just kind of blends everything, and if you weren't great about mincing your garlic, it'll kind of help you do that. So today, I made more than I usually make. I'm going to pour it into little cups, and they'll be back over there in the delicious looking food in the hallway. And I do hope that you will, you'll give it a taste.
Can you tell me what kind of blender that is?
I bought it so long ago, I don't know. It's a KitchenAid, and I think if you look for any emulsion. Yep.
Immersion blenders, they make life so much easier. You're really missing out if you don't have one.
And you pop it off and throw it in the dishwasher.
And you'll notice there's something really important that she didn't draw attention to, and that is she made the product in the container that she's going to store it in. That reduces your cleanup time dramatically. So basically, you just put the business end of the immersion blender, which hopefully you haven't stuck your finger into. There's thousands of injuries a year from immersion blenders because people stick their fingers in them. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. It's a big deal in the emergency rooms. Erica.
I used to think that mustard was for taste, but I just read this week it helps with the emulsion.
So it helps like the oil.
Oh, to find everything.
So don't skip the mustard part.
Got it.
Yeah.
Thank
Good.
you.
Yeah,
That's
yeah. I
great to
didn't
know.
realize that either, but it makes sense.
I always do.
Yeah,
I
we
think
always do too. I didn't.
With fresh garlic, with the fresh garlic, you'd need to.
I bet,
always
yeah.
do. And it also makes a great marinade for your chicken. Surprisingly.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say that my husband makes that exact vinaigrette, and he adds Parmigiano Reggiano. And
Yes.
I just have to say that I won't eat any other dressing.
I love it.
I'm really impressed that he stepped up and wants to do it, and then that I really like the product.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Good one. Yeah. Thanks,
Thank
Karen.
you guys.
Karen Zink from My Family Chef. Are you going to talk about being fit, Diane?
We're going to talk
What would
about,
you know about being fit?
Well, I know that it's a heck of a lot of work, and I know that it's a lifelong pursuit. I also know it's a lot of fun, and I think it's an admirable goal. So I hope you all take away one thing that I say to you tonight, and that is there is a risk in doing nothing. We could all say, I'm good enough. I played sports when I was in junior high and high school, and I was a multiple lettering athlete. And that's great. And that is part of why you're probably a healthy adult today, because we know from research that we lay down all of that muscle and also all of our VO2 max conditioning by the time we're about 22 or 25. So who you were at 22 and 25, that could be your idealized version of you. And then we spend a lifetime of doing a whole bunch of other stuff. There are people that continue to be super competitive athletes, and they train, I was going to say viciously, but perhaps I should just say vigorously, and they probably maintain some of that same kind of conditioning really through most of their entire life. But the reality is that for most of us, there is a line of declination. Well, actually, for all of us, there is a line of declination. And we need to think about how we want to intersect and make some changes in that. So we think of movement as medicine. What Miles really thinks about food as medicine, we think about movement as medicine. And if you choose to not continue to be an active mover, there will be consequences. Just like if you chose not to invest in your financial future, no one would say that you should start saving for retirement at 70. That would be laughable, and people would say, wow, that's going to be a really long journey and probably not such a happy outcome. I could say the exact same thing for bodies. And during COVID, Deanne and I had an opportunity to do a little podcast, and we put together a little document that we called the 401k for your body. And it's that idea of save early, save often, and then continue to enjoy or reap the benefits of that compounded investment that you have, but you never stop contributing. Well, I suppose there's a moment where you only take out the dividends and you live on that fat. But I would suggest that as active humans, that we continue to invest right on up until the last days. Miles made the joke that we want to think about our health span literally colliding with our lifespan. So there's no delta. I think it's we do see people all the time that the health span kind of poops out, and then there's a really long, hard last bits of journeys. We all know people like that. So
Can I interrupt for a second there, Diane? One of the things about the exercise that she's talking about is, remember, it is a metabolic tool. It's not just about muscle or burning calories. It improves your immune system, it improves your microbiome, and it's an antioxidant effect, it's an anti-inflammatory effect. Arguably, exercise might be the most potent anti-inflammatory tool you have, and so on. So the biological effects of exercise are numerous and can't be reproduced by any other tool.
Yeah, I think most of the studies would say that the one thing that is going to impact all factors of aging, probably the best and the least expensive, is exercise. And you don't have to go to a doctor to do it. You can do the exercise you've been doing your whole life with some modifications, or you can seek help and input for that. But it's in everybody's book at the top of the list of ways to maintain your health span. So what I would think a little bit about this is that as physical therapists, we use 3 R's in our practice: the idea of repair, restore, and reimagine. Repair is very PT-ish. People come here all the time because they're broken a little bit. Maybe they've had a sprain or a strain, maybe they're pre-op or post-op, fractures, all of the things that need to be fixed. And we love interacting with people in that manner, helping people understand what the limitations of their injury may be, get them started on those basic rehab exercises, and then progress. And then we always try to walk them through into the restore, but there are limitations of what we get to do on the physical therapy side by who pays the bills. If we're doing a repair episode of care and we're billing insurance companies, there need to be measurable goals and outcomes that we can defend as we're billing an insurance company. But sometimes you're done with your therapeutic goals. You've met all the ranges of motion, and you have 4+ or 5 strength grade, but you still aren't able to get back to the things you really love to do. And then just because it doesn't fit the bill of repair anymore doesn't mean you can't continue to have the coaching and the interaction you have. So that helps us look at it of, let's move into the restore. How do we look at taking that repaired range of motion and repaired strength and go back to functional activities? So you've been a lifelong skier and you've just had your first total knee, and you're a little bit sitting on the sidelines like, is that an activity I used to do, or is that an activity I still can do? And we love that idea of helping people then reimagine what the future will be. So we will move differently when we're in our senior years more than when we're in our younger years, but we love to be able to interact with people as they're moving along. So who's aging? I think as I look around this room, I think there may be a couple of exceptions, but pretty much what the literature supports is that aging is over 50. And so right up until that period of time, you're pretty much cooking along. You might have taken 20 or 30 years out of exercise because you were busy with schooling or career and kids, and you're sitting at a desk all day long, and there's just not enough minutes. I started to ask you almost what you found the #1 barrier is to eating healthy. I would guess it might be time of doing the shopping, doing the food prep, doing all of that. I think that's probably very similar for us in our world as well, that people run out of time. They don't have the time to do the things that we'd like to do. So
you could also say that they've got aberrant priorities, because your health span is really important.
Yeah.
And so if you don't have time to cook and you don't have time to exercise,
I mean, that's the why, right? That the literature is filled with facts about the fact that we have that peak fitness maybe at 22 to 25 with the max amount of muscle that we're going to have and the best cardiovascular conditioning. And then this little slow slide down over a period of time. But about 75, the literature supports that all of us will hit some very hard stops, and that we will see, whether you've exercised lifelong or whether you continue to push your limits really to the end, we do start to see sarcopenia, the loss of muscle mass. And that starts us down on the course of losing balance, losing stability, making us more prone to falls and the like. So the risk of not doing it gives us probably the why. Let's see how much we can do. So what should we be doing? Do we go back out and try to do the couch to 10K? There's a lot of things out there on the internet, and we saw this a lot during COVID, that there is so much amazing information on the internet and good information on the internet. Really smart people suggesting there's the 5 things to fix your hip if you are a postmenopausal woman. There are the 4 things to increase your ankle range of motion so you can resume running. I think there's a lot of great content. The problem with that is that's a one-way communication street. That's information that I'm seeing, but the person there doesn't see me. And they don't know that I broke my ankle as a 14-year-old and I've never gotten all of my dorsiflexion back. They don't know that I'm a post-breast cancer survivor that has some comorbidities. So that one-way street of information is a little bit limited in how specific my rehab is. Sorry, my lips are getting dry. How specific our rehab is. So we need to be able to exercise in a manner that is specific to our own needs. So coming in and finding a partner. I read a book a couple of years ago by a young woman about change. And we all set new goals for ourselves. It's I'm gonna get after that at my birthday, January, I'm gonna, eat healthy and, dry January, I'm not gonna drink alcohol. All the goals that we set, we all do it. But it's hard to make them stick. And I wonder how you find that about diet. I think barriers to entry are high in certain areas, but also how do I get that change to stick? And in this interesting book about change, the number one thing that stood out was change sticks when we have partnership. And when we have somebody that we're accountable to, whether it's a coach or whether it's a friend that you're meeting for coffee and then a 40-minute walk after that, or whether it's a physical therapist that you come into to have an episode of care for an injury or recovery from some sort of an incident. But partnering with someone seems to be one of the number one things that helps us achieve that goal, whatever the goal is that we're setting. So think about finding a partner along the way. And then let's think about the kinds of exercise. So at the core, and we all think about core, we tend to think about belly fat, or we tend to think about abdominal strength. But core is really, it can be that, but core is really about the strength of the things that hold us upright. And if we don't have a center, if we don't have the ability to find our weight stable over our feet, we can't move forward or move backward very well because we don't have a stable pole to hold us upright to be able to step against. So starting with stability, there's lots of experts out there in the field that recommend things like Pilates for a great place to start if you haven't exercised for a bunch of years. Maybe you've had that extra weight sticking around the middle and you think, oh, I'm going to get to that, and then you don't get to it, and then pretty soon you're finding it harder and harder to get your waistband together. Miles is going to talk about waist management in a minute. But finding someone that can help you identify your core. How do you turn on the muscles in the pelvic floor? Our pelvic therapists do that. Any of the PTs in this office do that. But then establishing that stability, and now that I know where I am in the center, I can risk taking myself forward in motion because I know I have control of the center. So stability is where I think we should probably begin for most of us. And there's a million things you can do. You can do single leg balance activities. You can do sit to stand activities. You can do things at home. You don't have to come to a gym. Some people have gym aversion. That's the biggest barrier to exercise for them, is they don't want to leave their house. So stability. Then we want to think a little bit about, I guess in the stability factor too, and when we think about sarcopenia, this sort of natural or inevitable loss of muscle mass as we age, there's a word that I think strikes fear in the hearts of lots of people, and that's frailty. And that's usually at the sort of end of that sarcopenia version, where no matter what we've done, all of a sudden I have lost weight. I think, well, that's good. My weight's down under control. But quite often, it's not fat that we're losing, it's muscle mass. And it's muscle mass that's going to take us through that health span right up to the very end of our lifespan. Then we need to think about strengthening. What can we do? There are millions of things you can do from home. You don't need to go to a gym. You can do sit to stand activities. You can do light weightlifting with small weights in your home. Or you can come and take a class somewhere. Andrea's going to be putting together for us a little bit of a kind of a senior weightlifting class over the next quarter. We're excited about adding that into the work that we're doing here. That really will be just a handful of exercises that are lifespan or longevity exercises. What do you want to do when you get to that last decade or two of your life? Do you want to be able to get on the floor to get up and down and playing with grandchildren? Do you want to walk with your friends? Do you want to still ride a bike? Those are all activities that before we get to that last decade, we ought to be investing and planning how we're going to get there. And they're at sort of that investment in your long-term health. Cardiovascular health is another that we think about. Recommendations are, if you haven't been doing cardio, meaning walking in a sustained manner or riding a stationary bike or an elliptical or swimming, doing something, if you haven't been doing something for more than 20 sustained minutes or 30 sustained minutes, you're beginning at kind of a very base level. But that's where you should start. Remember the risk of doing nothing, do something. And you might find it helpful to partner with a professional person that can give you some feedback about starting metrics. I kind of hesitate to give general guidelines because I started this talk by saying there's a lot of smart people telling you what to do, but is it right for you? Is it right for you? Not the same two programs will, but doing some sustained activity for at least 20 minutes a couple of times a week is a brilliant place to start.
So I was reading in some of Miles' literature about doing short amounts 3 times a day and also jumping. I have a mini trampoline, so I was curious if I were to jump on it for 1 minute number of different times.
Right.
Okay. Would that be?
That's a great place to start. However, I'm going to say, I wouldn't say that to everybody in this room because jumping for everybody in this room may not be your best activity. In fact, it may be your worst activity. And so I think having somebody come in, we're growing out our Beyond side with this lifestyle medicine, and we didn't have it ready to roll out tonight, but we're building a membership program for people that have discounts on classes and group classes, but also for coaching so that you could have somebody do a quick functional screening exam and say, yeah, you're great. Your knees and hips will do great with a little bit of work on the mini tramp. The mini tramp, the rebounder from the 80s and Jane Fonda, is making a big comeback. And there's a lot of people out there saying jumping or even just bouncing is really great, can be great for bone density as well. Again, when you're partnering with somebody that helps you understand your situation in the moment and then build a program from there. So really good question. I think, again.
So you think like a mini trampoline and with the bottom
Yep.
is a good.
I think globally, yes, but I would want to know exactly what your ankles and your knees and your hips are like before I would suggest that for anybody. But a minute is probably pretty benign and probably good. So we talked about aerobic capacity, we talked about strength, we talked about mobility. Let's talk about just functional lifestyle exercise. Mix it up. As a successful aging person, you might have been the 30-year-old that could run 100 miles, and you might have run 100 miles a week for a lot of years. And there are outliers. I have a 90-year-old that's still jogging. That's not typical, but what the better strategy as we age is to mix it up. So maybe I'm a swimmer, so I love to swim. A couple of days I'll swim, then I'm gonna do some yoga, then I'm gonna do some stretching. I have a funny little workout I've made up for myself now that involves a rebounder and a step, and I crank on 70s rock and roll, and I look like Richard Simmons minus the headband. But it's just that moving, do something.
One other quick question, a rebounder, is that the Pilates
Yeah,
thing?
no, yeah. That's a reformer. The rebounder is your bouncy thing. That's what it was called, a rebounder. That little bouncy mini tramp. The mini tramp was called a rebounder, so yeah, it was generalizing. Rucking, putting weight on your back and walking on inclines. Highly recommended for, again, cardiovascular work, but you're adding a little bit of load to that cardiovascular work. Dancing, maybe it's bouncing. Walking on a treadmill with a little bit of an incline. Eccentrics is an interesting movement form that we are teaching here that combines large body movements through all 3 planes of movement. So we want to mix it up because if you only do an exercise in this plane of motion, you're forgetting to train the lateral plane and the rotational plane that is so important for balance and stability that we talked about. Moving backwards in space. We don't do that very much, and it's something that really is triggering for falls. Tai Chi is the highest efficacy for fall prevention of any exercise out there, evidence-based. The fellow that teaches our Tai Chi classes here was trained in a Oregon Graduate Institute program with excellent evidence about fall prevention. So there's, I think, mixing it up. And then I'll stop, but at the very end, it has to be fun. And if you haven't been doing exercise and you're not quite sure where to start, and we see this every day in our practice, it's the most fun to take someone that's been struggling with movement and to restore them and see the light go on in their eyes, like, okay, this is actually fun. Or after 12 weeks, I can see change, positive change, and now I'm motivated. But if we make it onerous and so hard and so overwhelming, I think that's why Miles and his team so much recommend short duration, fun, have jump, stand up, do something quick. It's great to do.
Ping pong.
Ping pong. So I hope you'll just remember that what I asked you to remember at the very first is there's a risk in doing nothing. Don't do nothing. Come see us.
Thanks, Diane.
Ping pong.
Any questions for Diane?
I wish we did. I think that our teachers would revolt if we put one in the studio, but we could see about getting one on wheels that we could set up from time to time.
Because one of the interesting things about ping pong is of all the exercises that have been shown to reduce risk of dementia, it's actually the strongest. Now, that's probably because most of the studies have been done by the Japanese. I don't know why. But it's easy, it's cheap. You might have to take away your dining room table and put a ping pong table in there instead, but it's worth it. And incidentally, we forgot something important. That's to thank. So many people here have contributed to GreatMed.org, and we really appreciate that. Those of you who have done that, and especially Mr. Blackwell here, who's made a major support for us. That's allowed us to continue in what we're doing. And the wine was all presented by the Persingers, who are also big supporters of GreatMed.org, and we wouldn't be able to function without these donors. So thank you very much.
Yep.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Ryan.
Okay, I think you're going to talk a little bit about waste management, waste loss, and the microbiome. And then we're going to do a little ping pong match about some of the other factors that go into making healthy aging. Everybody's going to age, so how do you do it to the best of your abilities?
But the waste management, so we started off talking about the Nurses' Health Study and these 5 factors that have, in numerous large population studies have been shown to be really important. And those are not having excessive waste, not smoking, small amount of alcohol, exercise every day, good diet. And those provide just huge, that set of habits, which everybody is capable of achieving. It has these huge benefits. And cancer, heart disease, stroke, diabetes, living longer, living better. But the waste management part, I think, is often seen in our society as a struggle that you can't win. And we would argue that's not true. And you're not going to exercise off your waste. You have to eat less. And so if you go to our other website, which is Good Food, Great Medicine, we have a waste loss handout that gives 21 recommendations. But if this is an issue for you, start today. And the biggest tool, so there's numerous things you can do. You can eat out less. That's actually a huge factor for a lot of people. We already talked about how making food at home is so important for your health. Well, it also, for most people, it cuts out their calories per day by hundreds, 200 to 500 typically in most studies, for a variety of reasons. Secondly, you cut out refined carbohydrates. That's most breads and most sweets. You have something on your birthday, Christmas, Easter, New Year, Thanksgiving. And that's probably about, 4th of July. And so we boil it down to 21 items that, they're not all going to apply to you. But one of the things that we think always works, and there's, you can tell when a doctor's lying whenever he uses the word always or never. But this is one where we're tempted to say it always works. And that is if you have 1 or 2 servings of fruit or vegetables before you eat anything at every meal and snack. We don't think that ever fails. We see that people fail to do it, but we don't think we've ever seen it fail to. And so if you're somebody who says, I can't lose weight, well, you're going to have to eat less, and you're going to probably have to eat a whole lot more fruits and vegetables. And if you don't want to do that, then you're not committed enough to the problem. So we just blame you, Now there are occasionally other issues, there's thyroid issues and all that. There's every now and then, but those are actually surprisingly rare, incredibly rare. And so when you're dealing with this, look for ideas at work, and look at the person in the mirror and make them happen. And if every week you're not down about a pound, the next thing is go back to that person in the mirror and you say, you're not trying hard enough. And anytime you need ideas, give us a phone call. We've always got ideas. Go over our waste loss sheet again, but just realize it's critical. It's critical for hormonal levels. It's critical for muscle mass. It's critical for your immune system. We would not have had a COVID epidemic if it wasn't for obesity. I think that's a fairly fairly reliable thing. Almost all, you could say 80 to 90% of the serious illness associated with COVID were obesity-related complications. So obesity and hypertension, obesity and kidney failure, obesity and diabetes. And oddly enough, things like immunosuppression related to cancer therapies, for example, were way down the list. It was mostly obesity-related illness. And so take it seriously. You're going to make a huge difference. And can I tell you about an 80-year-old patient of ours? So this guy comes in. He's pretty chubby, diabetes. He thinks his life is sort of coming to an end. He says, you know, I'm 80, I'm really old, I can't move like I used to, and my hip hurts. So we send him to a hip hurt guy, and the hip hurt guy says, you need a new hip. And he says, do I really need a new hip? And I said, well, I don't know if you really need a new hip, but you could lose 50 pounds and maybe you wouldn't need a new hip. And so he lost 50 pounds, he didn't need a new hip. Excuse me, he eventually needed a new hip, we'll get to that. But he lost 50 pounds, got off his blood pressure medicine, got off his diabetes medicine, got a girlfriend. He's now 90. We just had his 90th birthday. He ended up having his hip replacement at 87. So remember, he lost 50 pounds and he's been exercising for those 7 years from the time he was first told he needed a new hip, and he delayed it. And now he did need a new hip. So how did he do in his surgery? Did he do like most 87-year-olds with a prolonged recovery time? Maybe dying on the table? No. He came in 2 days later. He had taken, I think, 1 dose of pain medicines after his hip replacement, and he was twirling his cane in the air because he wanted to make a point. And no, he only did that because he had muscle mass and less tummy.
So he was weightlifting?
No, he actually, almost all, he cut out the carbohydrates in his diet, and he was almost solely treadmill and a little bit of dumbbells. I do think that's one of the things that's missing. And literature is very strongly supporting that everybody would benefit from lifting weights. Yes, so I didn't mean to diminish weightlifting at all. Do you know who I'm talking about by any chance? Okay, so every now and then when somebody asks a question like that, they know the person I'm talking about because there's enough hints. But he came in with broken ribs. So I know, my ribs really hurt, Miles. And so I said, what happened? He said, well, it's getting off the treadmill. So he's about 85 or 86 at this point. He says, well, I was getting off the treadmill and I tripped on a dumbbell. And I said, you know, buddy, I don't know what award you get for that little comment, but it's a great award. But can you imagine the difference in his life compared to if he hadn't decided to take those steps at 80 years old? He would have just dribbled off the court, I'm afraid. Yeah. He's still driving, he's still living independently.
That's that frailty that we talk about, where we see it in patients all the time. They're robust, and then funk. And they're not. So.
Where can we get this waist loss management sheet?
Well, there's elements of it in the book that I mentioned earlier, maybe once or twice. And if you go to our website called Good Food, Great Medicine, do we have it on our greatmed.org yet? We will. So we don't have it on greatmed.org yet, but we have on goodfoodgreatmedicine.com. Then it's under resources. There's all kinds of handouts there that you may find helpful for all kinds of conditions.
Miles, let's talk a little bit about just some of the other components about aging well. And so I'll throw out a couple topics and then let's ping pong them back and forth and what you think about them. But I just have a little bit of a laundry list here. So we've talked a lot about the basics, food and movement. Medicine as movement and medicine as food. But I think I spent a lot of my career doing biofeedback and relaxation training, mindfulness work with patients. I think a lot about mind, body, and spirit. And that's that if we're only treating one component of our clients and our patients, it's like we're only moving in one dimension. We move in all 3 dimensions, and we have mind, body, spirit. So mindfulness is something that we could talk about. Stress management is the other one. We all have stress. Stress is just the body's ability to adapt to change. Some stress is great stress. You have a new grandbaby. Some is distress. Something is a difficult diagnosis or the loss of a family member. But that's demand that's placed on your body, and can you meet the demand? That's the definition of distress and good stress. Play, which you love. Purpose.
The Bible says, except ye be as little children, ye shall not enter the kingdom of God, roughly. And, you know, I really think about that because we don't play enough. Mm-hmm. You know, it's still fun to stomp in puddles when you're older. You just have to do it and before you realize that it's still fun.
Yeah, little ones don't exercise, they just play.
Yeah.
And I think we grow up, we get very serious, and we quit playing, and we sit in a desk, and our knees get stuck at 90, and our ankles get stuck at 90, and then we wonder why we can't take a full striding step. So play provides that for you, so whether it's ping pong or whether it's pickleball, although there are some downsides to pickleball. So I think play is something we could come back to. Volunteering, which is deeply associated with purpose. And almost all of the resources that I read around the aging or longevity work is purpose is absolutely at the top of the heap, right there with exercise and diet. Because if we lose the things that are meaningful to us, and it doesn't have to be work, but it could be a deep volunteering position or attending a great lecture like this gives you purpose.
Can I mention one other thing about purpose?
Yeah, please.
So in the I think it was the Chicago Healthy Aging Project, if my memory is correct, they to get in this study, you had to be healthy and I think in your 40s. And the deal is you'd stay in the study until you're dead, and when you're dead, the study guys can get your brain. And the study produced all kinds of papers, probably hundreds of papers. But one of the most interesting one was people who identified a strong sense of purpose throughout their life, even if they had significant Alzheimer's type changes in their brain, they did not exhibit Alzheimer's disease. Mm-hmm. Now I've made that a little broader than it should have been, but dramatically less Alzheimer's type dementia in people who had Alzheimer's type changes in their brain. And it's just an example of the kind of things, our bodies are really complex. And just like exercise does all kinds of things that you wouldn't even imagine, that we don't even know about right now, so does having purpose in your life. Mm-hmm.
We talked about the physical benefits of exercise, but there's all of the neurochemical benefits of exercise too, those endorphin and dopamine hits that we get from getting our heart rate up, or we getting for feeling stronger and just feeling more competent, so there's that connection too. There's a fellow out that's doing a bunch of writing right now about happiness, Arthur Brooks, if you've read any of his material. I think he is such a wise individual, and that is such a component about aging. And it's really, I think it gets sort of titrated down to having our needs be smaller than our wants. And when our wants exceed the things that we really need, that tends to lead to unhappiness. And then we're, nothing is ever quite right, and we're not satisfied with anything. And that creates a drag or a burden on the mind, body, and spirit. So.
Did you say Arthur Brooks?
Arthur Brooks. Yeah,
and we haven't talked about heat, have we?
No, I thought that's coming up. How about sleep before that?
Sleep's really important.
Sleep is the thing. Everybody talks about sleep. You got to sleep, and when you're laying there staring at the ceiling, and you're thinking, I got to sleep.
You sleep a lot better if you're exhausted.
Yep, exercise helps a ton.
We had a patient who had seen every sleep person around. We'd all tried different things for her, and she tried all the simple tricks. Then she went to Italy, and came back and said, "How did you sleep in Italy?" Because that was her big complaint. She said, "I slept like a baby. 10 miles of walking a day did it." And I think people who are struggling with sleep, they really should make sure that they're really tired every day. It's amazing how that works. And not too chubby, because chubbiness, tell me if I'm wrong here, Lou, but chubbiness is the biggest contributor to sleep apnea, which really messes with your sleep. And so if we'd probably get rid of 80% of sleep apnea without chubby. Yeah.
Oh, wow. And when we eat and what we eat makes a big difference. And, I poke lightly at the edges of alcohol, because for some people, they don't process alcohol as well, so alcohol can be disruptive to sleep too, but I'll let you.
And then heat.
Alcohol.
What about heat?
Heat's awesome.
Saunas and hot baths.
Yep.
People who have regular
evidence about
application of saunas or hot baths, the Japanese data is hot baths. The North American, Northern Europe, and Scandinavian data is all sauna. Pretty much. Then they really does make a big contribution to health. Do we have any Finns in the audience? Do you use a sauna, Dr. Jacob?
All the time.
Yeah.
And look how healthy he is. I mean,
That's
he's
right.
92 and you wouldn't know it.
Wow, that might be a HIPAA violation right there.
You never lied.
But in all seriousness, people who have application, typically it's 3 times a week, less heart disease, greater longevity, less cancer, better well-being, and better sleep. So one of the things that people should do if they're not sleeping is take the hottest bath they can stand for 20 minutes.
There's a lot. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, what about cold?
I was just going to say, there's a lot out there about cold.
Yeah, we don't have
the evidence is thin.
Yeah, the evidence is thin, but it is traditional. So remember, we give, I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, but we give a lot of weight to historical precedent. In other words, if something has been done by people forever, it's probably a good thing because we're still here. And so cold plunging has been a practice, at least in the Scandinavian countries, forever. So we would suspect it's good. But would I invest in a cold plunge pool? No. I mean, I really think keeping life simple is nice.
And then the last thing that we kind of put on this session, then we're going to change directions just a little bit, was sunlight.
Sunlight.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, so this is a really controversial area. But sunlight, regular sunlight exposure is associated with living longer and no more melanoma. And so the issue is, we would argue that evidence strongly favors sunlight exposure, especially for aging, healthy aging. Just don't burn. And this is the American Dermatology Association just hates the people that produce this data. And we argue the data is really strong.
Miles, I think I've heard you say before, 30 minutes of exposure to as much sunlight as you can get to as much skin as you can get. 30 minutes, no more.
30 might be, I would burn
Okay.
in 30. But in summer, 10 to 15, most people can handle. Just don't burn. And have as many square inches exposed as is socially acceptable under the circumstances. Because that's going to give you your healthy form of vitamin D. Because one of the weird things, for example, about vitamin D is the synthetic form of vitamin D that we use doesn't seem to work. It raises your blood level, but it does not appear to improve outcomes. It doesn't improve bone strength. It doesn't improve cancer risk. All the things that we know are associated with high vitamin D levels are not seen with the vitamin D supplementation as we currently do it. And that's probably because the vitamin D metabolism is probably a whole lot more complex. If you go back to the papers from the 1930s, where they didn't have synthetic vitamin D, we're using things like cod liver oil, there appear to be a lot of different compounds that are vitamin D compounds in the real world. And that's probably what we're missing. And there's a guy called Michael Hollick who's kind of famous because he developed the assay that we use for vitamin D. And he thinks we're barking up the wrong tree because we're measuring the wrong thing. This is his assay. So he's saying things like sunlight. He wrote a book about this called The UV Advantage. The American Dermatology Association hate it. UV referring to sunlight. And so his argument is sunlight hits the skin. It does make vitamin D. It also does a whole lot of other stuff. And he says it's the whole lot of other stuff that we don't understand. And so it overlaps nicely with the data that shows that people who, that avoiding sunlight is actually a health hazard. That's actually statistically, this is going to sound really bizarre, but it's kind of fascinating data, statistically similar to smoking. How's that for a weirdo statement? But I can defend it.
What's the half-life of exposure to sunshine with regards to vitamin D? If I'm out in the sun,
part of the problem is this time of year, you're not going to get any vitamin D no matter how naked you are for how long. And Michael Hollick, actually, he's kind of he's a humorist. And so he laid out in Boston, which is the same latitude as us, in the snow, naked, and had his vitamin D levels checked to demonstrate that you can't make vitamin D this time of year. So you have to make all your vitamin D in summer by being appropriately exposed to, in near nakedness, to sunlight. And then you store it up and it drops down during winter and it's up. I used to work at, I don't know any of you know a naturopath called Cindy Reuter, who we used to work with. She's in New Hampshire now. Fabulous naturopath. And she would comment, you know, everybody's trying to keep their vitamin D level at the same time all year round. And historically, that's not the way humans have been. We've had high levels in summer, low levels in winter. Is that necessarily a bad thing? And I'm arguing she's probably right.
So, my grandma lived 102, very healthy. Cod liver oil, she tried to make me take it in the winter all the time. It was disgusting. But she'd take a spoonful of it, and she never had trouble. I mean,
oh yeah, well, no, we prescribe cod liver oil every day as our sort of form of vitamin D.
It's in the book.
Yeah. And the modern cod liver oils taste better.
Okay, we're going to take a little break here for a second, but I think out of this last 10 or so minute conversation is the reminder that it's a super complicated equation. And so find yourself the trusted resources, as Miles said.
Like us.
You either belong to Miles or you belong to us, and we hope you find us your trusted resources that we can help vet the information that you're getting. We can come alongside you. We can help you understand what you're reading in the press. So there's a lot of ways that you can access information, and there's a lot of things that you can do to expand your help span. So Shelley and Miles are going to talk just a little bit here about GreatMed, because it's a super exciting thing that they have put together, and they know best how to lay it out for us.
This is Shelley Johnson, my partner in crime in GreatMed.org, and so she and I have started this. And what's GreatMed.org, Shelley?
Oh, I'm glad you
How's
After we wrap up, please stick around and ask more questions, because this is what it's all about for us. So GreatMed.org wants to partner with people and help them answer what's next. And that's why we love working with Connected Beyond, because we had a patient who took our 6 apple challenge. There was some information out there, and there's a lot on social media that will tell you this is the trick, or this is good for you, or this is bad for you. And there was some messaging about apples being bad for you because they contain so much glucose. And we said, well, if they're that bad for you, what would happen if you ate 6 of them a day? And so we started this TikTok challenge, this 6 apple challenge, where you eat a piece of whole fruit or vegetable, like a couple celery sticks, an orange, an apple, before every meal and snack. And one of our patients took the challenge. And she called up and said, so I'm doing this, how long do I do it for? And I said, well, you just don't stop.
Yeah, how long are you planning to live?
She said, because I'm really regular, and I'm going to end up looking like Matthew McConaughey with your ripped abs and stuff if I keep this up. And so she needed us to tell her what's next, which is just keep doing it. And that's the neat thing about Connect and Beyond, is they answer that, what's next, and they always have an answer of what's next in your journey. And at GreatMed.org, it started as a tool for doctors. So when we have a patient present with acute kidney injury, we'll go to a source called UpToDate and find out what is the workflow, what should we test for, what should we make sure we don't forget, and what seems to work as far as treatments. And so we wanted to create something like that for lifestyle, for doctors. So we started with an evidence-based lifestyle guide on type 2 diabetes reversal and prevention, reversal or remission, whichever way you'd like to call it, and prevention for doctors. And then we got a lot of feedback from patients. So we realized we're creating a tool for the medical community, and then we realized it's and beyond. So as we're interacting with people, we'll hear patients say, you know, Miles, I can do what you've told me to do, but then a couple of weeks go by, and if I just heard your voice, I'd be on it. I'd meet my goals. I would have exercise today. Well, you should start a podcast. So because we're kind of staying open, we started Walk, Don't Run to the Doctor. And you'll hear Diane on one of the 2 of the episodes, one that aired last Friday and one that's airing in 2 weeks, where we dialogue with people about evidence-based lifestyle tools. And so the invitation is to tell us what you'd like to see. And so stop by the table on your way out and tell us what you'd like to see. And what came out of that was the first ever crowdfunded evidence-based lifestyle podcast. And what came out of that was, you'll see at GreatMed.org there's a resources tab. We have extensive information on diabetes. We're going to write a big guide on cancer prevention and survivorship.
Thanks to Mr. Blackwell.
Yeah, but the public said, I'm afraid of cold and flu. I'm afraid of RSV, I'm afraid of COVID. And we said, we need to meet this fear with something people can do that builds their confidence. And so if the way you're living every day with eating whole foods and moving every day, you're going to have better outcomes. You're going to have fewer sick days. So you can look up the information we talked about and the resources on heat, sunlight, whole foods, and moving every day as an approach to fight respiratory illness, to combat cold and flu season and have fewer sick days. You'll find that on GreatMed.org. And so when people reach out, we kind of stop what we're doing if it makes sense, because that's what the public wants to hear. So you will see our cold and flu guide, or our cancer guide, at our next town hall. There's some information here. Another thing that we did was we want to come alongside care providers and help doctors who say they're too busy to teach lifestyle. We'll help them do it. And so first we have our lifestyle guides, so a doctor can look at the clinician guide with all the data, and I believe our cancer guide is up to 130 references, so they can see they can follow our research. Then we have a bite-sized patient guide. So a doctor could say to a patient, I don't want to summarize the latest evidence on cancer prevention and survivorship, but somebody already has. And here's a quick guide. That doctor's nursing team and medical assistants can come alongside and add that. And then we work with these teams to teach them how to do group visits and how to actually teach and deliver lifestyle medicine. And we kind of experimented with the idea of group visits, and those grew into town halls. So every other month at Souther Auditorium, we have a town hall with about 100, 120 people highlighting evidence-based lifestyle tools. So we've got in-person, we've got the podcast, we have written information, and we're just growing.
And can I, just on the cancer survivorship piece, so we talked earlier about how about 70% at least of type 2 diabetes cases don't need to have diabetes. We actually have solid evidence that that's reversible. And these are people who have diabetes who no longer have it. And we see this every day in our practice. Well, with cancer survivorship, it's actually kind of interesting because multiple studies show that with appropriate choice of diet and exercise, you can reduce cancer deaths and recurrence in patients with cancer by 20 to 40%, depending on which study you're believing. That proportion is actually right in line with the kind of improvements that we expect to see with chemotherapy and radiation. We don't beat the surgeons. And so along with surgery and chemotherapy and radiation for our cancers, we should be plugging lifestyle. And that's what we're working on at greatmed.org right now. And we think I don't think it's unfair to say it's criminal, in my opinion, that it's not being promoted more. And so we're trying to plug that gap.
We don't want to condemn the medical model. We want to come alongside and support it and see oncologists have better outcomes for their patients.
Plus, the patients that are doing this, who are going through cancer therapy and they're getting radiation and chemotherapy and so on, they actually get fewer side effects, they have better outcomes, they tolerate the chemotherapy better, they're less likely to have dose reductions or dose cessations due to side effects. And so it's really and the danger is, of course, that you're going to say to people, hey, cabbage is really good for you, and they're saying, I'm going to have cabbage and not radiation, which probably is not a good choice in most of these situations. But
Why aren't more people talking about this? Why don't you see marketing campaigns about lifestyle?
We think it's just a simple fact of money. There's just no financial incentive to do this. It's and also, the public. So Thomas Edison. No, it wasn't Thomas Edison. It was the guy who started Johns Hopkins Medical School, Sir Osler. Yeah. Sir William Osler said this is about 120 years ago or so. Perhaps the greatest physician who's ever lived, depending on how you measure these things, said the chief difference between humans and animals is humans really like to take medicine. Except he said it slightly more elegantly. So the idea here is that, if you go to a doctor and you're given a pill, a radiation regimen, whatever, it's not something you have to do. The stuff we're talking about, you have to do. There's no money in it, and it's kind of sexy. It's not sexy at all, although it may make you look sexier. And so it's lacking all this appeal because you actually have to work. I mean, my wife will, and I'm sure Karen would say the same thing. Chopping vegetables takes time.
But it is getting noticed, and that's why our crowdfunding effort was surprisingly successful. People want to hear about it. They want to talk about it. Good Day Oregon did a little story on it. There was an Oregonian piece today about it. So people want to get involved. And so the invitation is get involved. And you can do that in all kinds of ways. We haven't imagined how many ways. But thanks to generous donors, we're able to do this kind of work. So anyone who makes a donation to GreatMed.org today gets to go home with a goodie bag, a thank you bag. We also want to chat with you about how we can be better. And that's how we had a cooking demo today. Someone reached out and said, I'm a family chef. Can I help make some food? And then, yes, you'll see Karen on a podcast coming up soon. So after Diane closes, please stay and talk to us and ask more questions.
The closer.
Oh, go ahead. I just wanted to ask Shelley what her background is.
Yeah, about what?
What's your background?
Oh, I'm a nurse. I graduated from nursing school in 2008. I started working for a hospital in 1999 as a hearing screener, and the nurses on the postpartum unit encouraged me to go to nursing school. And so I worked in labor and delivery and postpartum unit and prenatal care. And in our prenatal setting, we had a group of patients who had recurrent gestational diabetes with each pregnancy, and the nurses became sad and defeated, and they said, we can't help these women. The midwives and doctors have no time to talk to them about diet and exercise.
Why does gestational diabetes matter?
It matters because it puts that woman at a risk for developing type 2 diabetes later on, and heart disease and other conditions, and they die sooner. And when a mom gets healthy, her whole family gets healthy.
Plus, she has more pregnancy complications. So the babies are bigger. She has, yeah.
more operative birth. So we partnered with Miles to start a green pregnancy, healthy pregnancy model, and we saw an incredible amount of outcomes. And we'll actually be talking about that at our first ever healthcare conference for clinicians in April. And so basically a generous donor gave our prenatal clinic funds to buy every woman a copy of Good Food, Great Medicine. And based on the book and some cooking classes, we used our break room at work as a teaching kitchen for these pregnant moms, and they just loved it. And I said, something about your method works. And I think I just didn't leave him alone, and he said, let's start a foundation.
So, but her patients, her gestational diabetes patients, they did not need insulin. They actually, it actually created a problem within Providence because the insulin providers weren't getting anybody coming to them. That was, I'm not exaggerating, am I?
But we pivoted and we said, well, we'll still refer people to the Diabetes Treatment Center, but it's going to take place in a teaching kitchen. And they said, okay. And so we kind of stayed alive for a while.
So they didn't need, they had less anemia of pregnancy, less preterm and late-term births, less operative birth, and less pregnancy birthing complications. So there was like half a dozen major metrics that were better in these women who had reversed their gestational diabetes instead of just treating it with insulin, which would be the normal way to do it.
Can you remind me if A1C is a part of diabetes?
A1C is probably the best. There's no great way to measure blood sugars, but the A1C is the best we have right now for looking at average blood sugars over time. So she's referring to a blood test called HbA1c, which is what the main measure we use for diabetes management. But better to not have diabetes, so you don't have to know what your HbA1c is.
Well, thank you so much, all of you, for coming tonight. We've kept you a little tiny bit over, but I really hope you will stay. We have tons of food and beverage. So there's food in there in the yoga studio, and there's food in the hallway and out at the front office, and a little bit of wine for you. Just know that we're here to partner with you, both Miles and Shelley and all of my team here at Connect and Beyond. This is what makes life fun, is doing things together. It's always, that's our tagline, better together. I think a million businesses have used that, but we really believe it to be true. Our outcomes are better, our life is better, our happiness factor and joy and health is better. So please stay and enjoy. And this is our first time to use our gym to set it up like we have it today. We've learned a lot of lessons. Brene Brown calls these FFTs, and I'll let you dig into that for yourself. But you learn a lot, and we really intend to and plan to continue education opportunities with Miles and others. But as we were putting it together, we should do something about just osteoporosis. We should do something about just a topic. So expect to see more of us, and now that you're part of a blended family, we'll look forward to seeing you again. Thank you.